Hey kid, first class isn't for people like you. Get back to economy where you belong. Those words sliced through the cabin like a blade, leaving the entire first-class section in stunned silence. Heads turned, whispers spread, and several passengers instinctively raised their phones to record. A 12-year-old boy sat frozen, clutching his boarding pass tightly, his small fingers trembling as he looked up at the tall, red-faced man towering over him. In that single moment, humiliation and disbelief collided. But what no one knew was that this boy was not just any passenger. He was about to change the future of an entire airline. And by the time the plane landed, nothing would ever be the same again. Before we dive in, where are you watching from? Tell us in the comments below. And if this story moves you, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button so more people can hear it. Now, let's begin. Jamal Thompson wasn't just any 12-year-old boy. Behind his nervous eyes and quiet smile was a mind that had already changed millions of lives. He was the founder and CEO of Innovate Ed, an AI-driven learning platform designed to personalize education for children with special needs. What started as a project to help himself overcome ADHD had grown into a $1.5 billion company serving 50 million students across 52 countries. Teachers called it revolutionary. Parents called it life-saving. But to Jamal, it was just his way of helping kids like him find their place in a world that often left them behind. Still, for all his brilliance, Jamal was no stranger to prejudice. He remembered being kicked out of a tech conference at just 10 years old because security assumed he didn't belong among investors and engineers. He remembered watching his father, Darius Thompson, come home exhausted night after years as a mechanical engineer, quietly carrying scars from decades of workplace discrimination. That morning, as sunlight filtered through the blinds of their modest home on Chicago's South Side, Darius noticed his son adjusting the knot of his small navy blue tie in the mirror. First impressions matter, Darius reminded him gently, resting a hand on Jamal's shoulder. But don't waste your time proving you belong, son. You were born to change the way they see you. Jamal smiled faintly, repeating the words under his breath as he grabbed his laptop bag. Today was one of the most important days of his young life. He and his father were flying from Chicago to New York City to pitch Innovate Ed's global expansion plan to Apex Ventures, one of the biggest investment firms in the world. If successful, the deal would secure $250 million in funding, enough to bring Innovate Ed to schools in 60 countries and revolutionize special needs education forever. At O'Hare International Airport, the hum of morning travelers filled the terminal as Jamal and Darius made their way through security. Jamal clutched his passport and boarding pass for Flight 247, first-class seat 1A. His father, as always, had insisted on sitting back in economy to save money, joking that geniuses need legroom more than old engineers. Jamal laughed, but deep down, he hated being separated from his father. Still, he understood why Darius always reminded him, work hard, stay humble, and never forget where you came from. As Jamal boarded the plane, his polished black shoes tapped lightly against the carpeted aisle. The first-class cabin glimmered with soft leather seats and quiet elegance. He placed his bag neatly under the seat, settled in, and took a deep breath, just as he was fastening his belt. A shadow loomed over him. Edward Harrington, a 55-year-old white sales director at Compete Learn, Innovate Ed's struggling rival, stood glaring down at him, holding his boarding pass tightly. "You're in my seat, kid," Harrington said, his voice sharp, his words dripping with entitlement. Jamal blinked, confused, and held up his ticket. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is seat 1A. Harrington snatched the ticket from his hand without even looking at it. "You expect me to believe a kid like you can afford first class? This is for paying passengers, not children playing dress-up." A hush fell over the cabin. Several passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman lowered her glass of champagne and whispered something to her husband. A man in a gray suit quietly started recording on his phone. Jamal felt the weight of every stare pressing down on him. His throat tightened, but before he could respond, Lisa Grant, the lead flight attendant, approached quickly, sensing tension. "Sir, is there a problem here?" she asked, glancing between Harrington and Jamal. "Yes, there's a problem," Harrington snapped, shoving Jamal's boarding pass at her. "This kid is pretending to have a first-class ticket. I've flown this route 100 times. I'm a Diamond member. Put him in the back where he belongs." Lisa frowned, scanning Jamal's boarding pass carefully. "Sir, this ticket is valid. Seat 1A is assigned to Mr. Jamal Thompson." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Jamal exhaled, relieved, but Harrington's face darkened, his voice rising so loud it carried through the cabin. "Diamond members outrank kids with fake startups," he barked, pointing at Jamal. "This airline should know better than to give premium seats to children, especially ones like him." The words burned deeper than anything else. Jamal lowered his eyes, wishing he could disappear, but before anyone could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "I'll switch seats," said a calm, confident woman sitting nearby. It was Victoria Langston, a former vice president at Megatech Investments. She didn't know Jamal personally, but she recognized him immediately. She'd seen his name in confidential reports. As she rose from her seat, her expression was unreadable, but her gaze on Harrington was icy. "No need," Lisa insisted firmly. "Mr. Thompson has every right to be here." Victoria sat back down slowly, her eyes never leaving Harrington. Unbeknownst to anyone, she carried secrets that would soon change everything. Harrington, frustrated and red-faced, finally stormed off to his own seat, but not before muttering under his breath. Jamal heard the words, and they stung more than anything. "Enjoy it while you can. Kid, people like me make sure kids like you don't stay on top for long." Jamal stared down at his hands, silent. He had faced bias before, but something about this felt different. This wasn't just one man's prejudice. It was the start of something much bigger, something darker. He didn't know it yet, but within hours, this confrontation would spiral into an FBI investigation, a corporate conspiracy, and a battle that could decide the future of Innovate Ed itself. And Jamal, barely 12 years old, was about to learn just how high the stakes truly were. The engines roared softly as Flight 247 lifted off from O'Hare International Airport, bound for New York City. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm glow, and a quiet hum settled over the first-class section. But Jamal Thompson couldn't relax. His small hands gripped the armrests tightly, the sting of Edward Harrington's words still burning in his ears. He had faced prejudice before, but never this publicly, never under the eyes of so many strangers. Across the aisle, Harrington reclined arrogantly in his seat, scrolling through his phone as though nothing had happened. He wore the smugness of a man who believed he owned the sky, his diamond member badge gleaming on his lapel like a crown. Jamal turned his gaze toward the window, forcing himself to breathe slowly, but the tension clung to him like static electricity. The confrontation should have ended there, but Harrington wasn't finished. 20 minutes into the flight, when the seatbelt sign blinked off and passengers began settling into their routines, Harrington leaned forward and flagged down a passing flight attendant. His voice was loud enough for several passengers to hear. "I want security waiting at the gate when we land," he said coldly. "There's a kid up here using a fake identity. I suspect fraud, possibly even money laundering." Jamal's head jerked up. For a moment, he thought he had misheard, but the words hung heavy in the air, undeniable and venomous. Lisa Grant, the lead flight attendant, stiffened. "Sir," she said firmly, lowering her voice. "We've already verified Mr. Thompson's ticket. Everything is in order," Harrington sneered. "You verified a piece of paper. Do you have any idea who this kid is claiming to be? He's pretending to be the CEO of a billion-dollar company. He probably hacked his way onto this flight. Someone needs to check his ID. Call the authorities now." Jamal's stomach twisted. The murmurs around him grew louder as passengers shifted in their seats. A few craned their necks to get a better look at him. One man whispered, "Did you hear? Something about fraud." Another passenger raised her phone higher. Recording the entire exchange for TikTok, Darius, seated back in economy, had no idea any of this was happening. Not yet. Jamal opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out before he could gather his courage. A calm, steady voice spoke from behind him. "That's enough," said Victoria Langston, her tone sharp as glass. She leaned forward slightly, her elegant pearl earrings catching the light. "Mr. Harrington, I suggest you lower your voice. If you continue making unfounded accusations, you'll regret it." Harrington turned to glare at her, recognition dawning on his face. "Langston," he spat bitterly. "Figures you'd side with him? What's this? Some big tech conspiracy?" Victoria's lips curved into a cold, knowing smile. "Oh, I know plenty about conspiracies. Edward. Maybe more than you'd like." Harrington stiffened but said nothing more. Jamal turned toward Victoria, his wide eyes filled with confusion. She offered him the faintest nod, her expression unreadable, then leaned back in her seat, crossing her arms, unbeknownst to anyone on board. Victoria had once been a senior vice president at Megatech Investments, the powerful parent company of Harrington's employer, Compete Learn. She had resigned 6 months earlier after discovering evidence of a covert strategy, target promising minority-founded startups, discredit their founders, and either force hostile buyouts or destroy them entirely. Innovate Ed, Jamal's company, was at the top of their list. Harrington, as Compete Learn's sales director, was acting on orders he didn't fully understand. But Victoria did, and she had come prepared. Jamal didn't know it yet, but this flight was about to become the opening move in a corporate war worth billions. An hour into the flight, turbulence struck unexpectedly, jolting the cabin. The seatbelt sign flashed, and passengers clutched their armrests as the plane dipped and shuddered. Jamal inhaled sharply, his anxiety spiking. Flying always unsettled him, but combined with Harrington's accusations, the pressure was overwhelming. That was when Malik Reeves, Innovate Ed's chief operating officer, leaned forward from seat 3C and placed a steady hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Breathe, little man," Malik whispered gently, his calm voice cutting through the storm. "In and out. You're okay." Jamal nodded shakily, focusing on Malik's breathing cues. Malik, a former special education teacher turned COO, had been Jamal's mentor and protector ever since he joined Innovate Ed. Unlike most executives, Malik never treated Jamal like a child. He treated him like a leader. But Malik's comforting presence also came with a risk. He forgot to lower his voice when he added softly, "Don't let this distract you. CEO, Apex Ventures is going to love your pitch." The word CEO hit the cabin like an electric charge. A few passengers gasped audibly. One woman in row 2 whispered, "Wait, that kid runs Innovate Ed?" Another man began furiously typing into his phone, no doubt searching Jamal's name online. Harrington overheard and laughed cruelly. "A 12-year-old CEO? Oh, this is rich. No wonder your company's under investigation." Jamal's cheeks flushed crimson, and Malik shot Harrington a glare sharp enough to cut steel. But the damage was done. In less than 5 minutes, whispers of fraud, fake CEO, and scam rippled through the first-class cabin. Several passengers began live streaming on TikTok and YouTube. Within half an hour, Hashtags like hashtag Flight 247 drama and hashtag Innovate Ed scandal began trending online, back in the cockpit. The captain received an urgent message from Newark Liberty Airport. Homeland Security and the FBI's Newark field office had been alerted. Someone, almost certainly Harrington, had filed a report claiming Jamal was attempting to flee to New York using a stolen identity tied to financial crimes. Without warning, the flight was diverted. The intercom crackled to life. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an operational matter, we will be landing at Newark Liberty International Airport. Please remain seated and follow crew instructions." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Jamal felt his chest tighten as the meaning sank in. Operational matter was code. Someone had accused him of a federal crime. Malik immediately placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's arm. "Listen to me, kid," he whispered firmly. "Whatever happens when we land, stay calm, tell the truth. I've got you." Jamal nodded, but his heart hammered so loudly it drowned out everything else. From across the aisle, Victoria Langston silently opened her leather briefcase, slipping out a thin envelope filled with confidential Megatech documents, evidence she had been holding on to for months. If things escalated the way she suspected, Jamal would need it. Harrington, meanwhile, sat smugly in his seat, sipping a glass of wine, convinced he had just crippled his competitor's future. But he didn't know that by pressing this attack. He was about to expose Megatech's entire secret operation. As the plane descended through thick gray clouds, tension suffocated the cabin. Several passengers recorded every second, narrating updates for their social media followers. Jamal closed his eyes, replaying his father's words from that morning. "Don't prove you belong. Change how they see you." At that moment, he didn't feel like a CEO, a prodigy, or even a leader. He felt like a scared kid trapped in a storm much bigger than himself. But deep down, something stronger was beginning to stir. A quiet resolve. He didn't know it yet, but this was the moment his fight truly began. The wheels screeched against the tarmac as Flight 247 touched down at Newark Liberty International Airport. The unexpected diversion leaving passengers murmuring nervously. The air inside the cabin felt thick, heavy with tension. As everyone whispered about the kid in first class accused of fraud, Jamal Thompson sat perfectly still, his small hands gripping the edge of his seat, his knuckles pale. His father, Darius, still seated back in economy, didn't yet know why the plane had been diverted. He just knew something was wrong. His instincts, sharpened by years of being overlooked, underestimated, and discriminated against, screamed at him that his son was in trouble. As the plane taxied toward a remote gate, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, for your safety, please remain seated. Local authorities will be boarding shortly." A wave of confusion swept the cabin. Several passengers began recording live for TikTok and YouTube, their captions ranging from "FBI detains kid CEO" to "fraud scandal mid-flight." By the time the jet bridge locked into place, 3 uniformed officers stood waiting, alongside 2 people in plain suits. FBI Special Agent Carla Mendoza and Special Agent Thomas Bennett from the Newark field office. The murmurs became gasps as Carla stepped into the cabin, her badge glinting under the cabin lights. She scanned the first-class section and stopped at Jamal. "Mr. Jamal Thompson?" she said evenly. Jamal's heart thudded violently in his chest, but he nodded slowly. Carla's tone remained calm, controlled, but there was no mistaking the authority in her voice. "We need you and your father to come with us." Darius pushed his way forward from economy, his protective instincts exploding the moment he saw the tension in his son's face. "I'm his father," he said firmly, placing himself between Jamal and the agents. "What is this about?" Thomas Bennett stepped forward, holding a tablet displaying a security report. "We received a tip alleging potential identity fraud and financial crimes tied to Innovate Ed." He explained in clipped tones. "We need to verify documentation and conduct a brief interview at our Newark field office." The cabin filled with shocked whispers. A woman in row 2 muttered, "He's 12 years old. This is insane." Another man raised his phone higher, whispering into his live stream. "Guys, this is breaking news. A Billionaire kid CEO just got flagged by the FBI. Edward Harrington, seated smugly across the aisle, sipped his wine with deliberate calmness, his face an infuriating mask of triumph. But he underestimated 2 things: Victoria Langston and the truth. As Jamal and Darius were escorted off the plane, Victoria quietly gathered her briefcase and followed them into the terminal, her presence unnoticed by most. Inside a stark interrogation room at the FBI's Newark field office, Jamal sat at the edge of a metal chair, his small frame dwarfed by the cold gray walls. Darius sat beside him, hands folded tightly, jaw clenched with barely restrained anger. Across the table sat Agents Mendoza and Bennett, their expressions professional but cautious. Carla began, her voice softening when she addressed Jamal directly. "Mr. Thompson, we're not here to accuse you of anything. We've received conflicting reports, and we need to clarify what happened." Jamal swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't do anything wrong." Darius reached over, resting a steady hand on his son's shoulder. "My son built Innovate Ed," he said firmly, his voice shaking with both pride and frustration. "Check his credentials, check his company filings, check anything you want, but do not treat him like a criminal because some entitled man doesn't believe he belongs in first class." Carla nodded slowly, typing on her tablet. "We've already verified the Innovate Ed registration," she admitted. "The issue stems from a security complaint filed mid-flight, alleging that Jamal was traveling under a false identity and involved in laundering investor funds through offshore accounts." Jamal's eyes widened. "Offshore accounts?" he repeated, his voice cracking. "I don't even have a driver's license yet." Thomas Bennett leaned forward, sliding a document across the table. "This came from CompeteLearn," he explained. "Their director, Edward Harrington, filed the initial report." Darius's fists clenched, his nails digging into his palms. "That man," he growled, "is lying." Carla held up a hand. "We're investigating all angles. Mr. Thompson." At that moment, the door opened, and Alicia Ramirez, Innovate Ed's sharp strategic attorney, strode into the room. Her arrival shifted the entire dynamic instantly. Dressed in a tailored charcoal gray suit, she placed a thick folder on the table and addressed the agents with calm authority. "I represent Mr. Thompson and Innovate Ed," she announced, her voice steady and controlled. "Before you proceed further, I need to formally present evidence that this is an orchestrated smear campaign." Carla arched an eyebrow. "Go on." Alicia slid a printed email thread across the table. It was internal correspondence from CompeteLearn's executive board, obtained by an anonymous source, later revealed to be Victoria Langston. The emails detailed a coordinated effort, directed by Megatech Investments, CompeteLearn's parent company, to undermine Innovate Ed's credibility, force an investigation, and create panic among investors. One line stood out in bold: discredit the boy genius publicly, question legitimacy, divert funding. Carla's expression hardened as she read the documents. Thomas leaned back, rubbing his temple. "This changes things," he admitted quietly. "Megatech," Carla said slowly, "has been on our radar for years, but we've never had anything this concrete." Alicia nodded. "You do now, and we're prepared to cooperate fully." Just then, Victoria Langston stepped into the room, her calm, deliberate presence commanding immediate attention. Dressed in a crisp white blouse and black slacks, she placed a flash drive on the table. "This," she said softly, "contains 10 months of internal Megatech recordings, board meetings, strategy calls, documented sabotage plans targeting Innovate Ed and at least 5 other minority-founded startups." Carla stared at her, stunned. "And you are?" "Victoria Langston," she said, her tone measured. "Former senior vice president at Megatech. I resigned the moment I discovered what they were doing, but I couldn't stay silent any longer." Darius turned to her, his expression wary. "Why help us?" Victoria's gaze softened. "Because I stood by and watched them ruin lives. I won't do it again." In that moment, the weight of the situation became clear. This wasn't just about Jamal. It wasn't just about a stolen seat or an insult in first class. This was about power, greed, and systemic efforts to erase minority success stories from the tech industry. Harrington had lit the match, but Megatech had built the fire. Carla Mendoza stood, her decision made. "We're opening a full investigation into Megatech investments effective immediately," she declared. "Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. You've done nothing wrong." Relief washed over Jamal's face, but Darius remained tense, his protective instincts refusing to let go of the anger simmering beneath his calm exterior as they left the FBI office. Alicia leaned down to Jamal and whispered, "This isn't over. They tried to bury you. Jamal, now we'll make sure the world sees the truth." Harrington, still seated smugly at a Newark airport cafe nearby, didn't know that his false report had backfired spectacularly. By triggering the investigation, he had opened a door Megatech had spent years keeping locked, and within days, the entire tech industry would be watching as secrets unraveled live on every major news outlet. As Jamal walked through the terminal beside his father, his steps were quiet but steady. For the first time since the flight began, his shoulders were straight, his chin lifted. He wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was about to fight for every young innovator Megatech had tried to silence. And deep down, even at 12 years old, he understood something powerful. Sometimes the smallest voices start the loudest revolutions. The glass walls of the FBI's Newark field office reflected the gray afternoon sky, the city humming faintly beyond. But inside, the tension was suffocating. Jamal Thompson sat quietly beside his father, Darius, his small legs swinging slightly above the floor, while Alicia Ramirez, InnovateEd's lawyer, and Victoria Langston, the whistleblower who had walked away from Megatech Investments, faced Special Agents Carla Mendoza and Thomas Bennett across the long steel table. What had started as a humiliating confrontation in first class had now become something far bigger. A battle against a billion-dollar conspiracy designed to erase Jamal and InnovateEd from the tech landscape forever. Carla leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her sharp eyes fixed on Victoria. "I need you to walk us through everything," she said firmly, her tone equal parts command and invitation. Victoria inhaled deeply, her hands clasped tightly together, and began speaking with the slow, deliberate cadence of someone haunted by what she was about to reveal. 16 months ago, she said softly, I discovered Megatech's internal strategy codenamed Project Eclipse. Its purpose was simple: identify promising minority-founded startups, especially those disrupting education and healthcare, and systematically destroy their credibility. Darius's brow furrowed. Destroy them how? Victoria opened the thin black leather folder in front of her, pulling out color-coded documents. First, they seeded doubt among investors. Anonymous reports questioning financial compliance. Then they used people like Edward Harrington to provoke public incidents, filing false security complaints, feeding reporters tips, even planting fake customer reviews. If that didn't work, they'd make hostile buyout offers under threat of litigation. InnovateEd. She paused, glancing at Jamal, was their biggest target. Jamal stared at her, confusion and disbelief swirling in his young eyes. Why us? He asked, his voice quiet but steady. Because, Victoria said, meeting his gaze with an almost maternal softness. You built something they couldn't control. Innovate Ed's success wasn't supposed to happen. A 12-year-old black CEO, a global platform changing education for children with special needs. You're everything their investors fear. You're proof that innovation doesn't come from the same old places. Jamal swallowed hard, his fists clenching unconsciously. Darius placed a hand on his son's shoulder, steady but silent. Alicia slid a stack of documents across the table toward Carla and Thomas. Here are 10 months of internal Megatech board recordings, she explained crisply. Victoria risked everything to secure these. You'll hear CEO directives, boardroom votes, and direct instructions to learn, including emails explicitly naming Jamal Thompson and Innovate Ed. Carla scrolled through the files on her tablet, her expression hardening with each passing page. This isn't just corporate sabotage, she muttered, glancing at Thomas. This is organized fraud, harassment, and potentially federal racketeering. Thomas nodded grimly. We'll escalate to the Justice Department. Jamal's voice broke the silence, small but filled with quiet defiance. They tried to take my seat on the plane, he said, his words trembling but steady. But this was never about a seat. It was about taking everything from me. His words hung in the room like a challenge. For the first time. Carla's stern gaze softened. You're right, she said simply. And now we're going to stop them. Victoria leaned forward, her voice lower, urgent. It won't be easy, she warned. Megatech has influence everywhere. Lawyers, PR firms, even lobbyists in Washington. Once they realize the FBI is involved, they'll come after you harder. They'll try to discredit Jamal in every possible way. Darius straightened, his protective instinct rising like a tide. Let them try, he said firmly. We've spent our whole lives being underestimated. This time, they're not just underestimating us. They're underestimating my son. Alicia's phone buzzed on the table, and she glanced at the screen before answering quickly. Put him on, she said into the receiver. Seconds later, the voice of Robert Kim, chairman of Apex Ventures, filled the speaker. Alicia, he said gravely, I've just received 3 separate calls from Megatech's legal team threatening to sue Innovate Ed for alleged intellectual property theft. They're pushing this hard. Do you want me to hold off on Friday's pitch meeting? Jamal looked up, alarm flashing in his wide brown eyes. Alicia's gaze darted to Darius, then back to Robert. No, she said firmly. We're moving forward as planned. Friday's meeting could secure Innovate Ed's future. Robert hesitated, his voice dropping. Then prepare for war. Megatech's already circulating rumors that Innovate Ed's valuation is fake. The press is eating it up. Jamal inhaled sharply. But Malik Reeves, Innovate Ed's COO, who had been quietly observing from the corner, finally spoke. Let them run their smear campaign, Malik said calmly, his deep voice cutting through the noise. We'll fight with facts. We'll show Apex exactly what Innovate Ed can do, and we'll do it with more dignity than Megatech ever thought possible. Victoria nodded slowly, and when Harrington realizes how badly he's been used, he'll talk. She added, Trust me, his arrogance is his weakness. At the mention of Harrington, Jamal's jaw tightened. He lied about me, Jamal said softly, his voice shaking with emotion. He made the FBI think I was a criminal. Darius turned to face his son fully, gripping his shoulders gently but firmly. Son, listen to me, he said, his voice low but commanding. This isn't about Harrington anymore. He's a pawn. This is about fighting for what you built. For every kid who needs Innovate Ed. For every startup they've crushed before you. Jamal blinked back tears, nodding silently. Carla glanced at Victoria. If these recordings hold up, she said carefully, we'll issue subpoenas within the week. Megatech executives will have to testify under oath. But Jamal, she added, turning to him directly, I need you to prepare for media pressure. Once this breaks, you'll be at the center of it. Alicia leaned in, her voice steady but soothing. "We'll manage the press. We'll control the narrative. We'll make sure the world knows the truth." Jamal nodded, his small hands resting atop the table, steady now. His earlier trembling replaced with something deeper. Resolve. Then, just as the room settled into a fragile calm, Thomas Bennett's phone vibrated sharply. He glanced at the screen, his expression tightening as he read an incoming alert. "Megatech just filed an emergency injunction," he said flatly. "They're trying to block Innovate Ed from accessing $60 million in active funding. If the judge approves, your cash flow could freeze within 24 hours. Alicia exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. "Of course they did," she muttered. Darius rubbed his temples, but before panic could set in, Victoria leaned forward, her tone razor-sharp. "Let them burn their resources fighting us," she said calmly. "They've made one fatal mistake already, underestimating a 12-year-old. A silence fell over the room, punctuated only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. Jamal looked from face to face, taking in the weight of what they were saying. In less than 24 hours, his life had transformed from CEO to accused criminal to reluctant warrior in a corporate war spanning billions. But something inside him had shifted, something deep and unshakable. "Then we fight," Jamal said finally, his voice small but unyielding. Alicia smiled faintly, pride flickering in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "We fight." Outside the FBI office, the evening sky had begun to darken, the city lights of Newark flickering to life. Jamal and his father stepped into the cool night air, flanked by Alicia and Malik, while Victoria lingered briefly behind, her gaze fixed on the skyline as if seeing ghosts from her past. For years, she had carried the weight of Megatech's corruption alone. Tonight, she wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere across the city, Megatech executives were already mobilizing their response teams, drafting statements, pressuring allies, and preparing for a battle they thought they could win. But in under 72 hours, everything would change. Jamal didn't yet realize it. But this wasn't just a fight for Innovate Ed. It was the beginning of something far bigger, a fight for truth, justice, and every underdog they had ever tried to silence. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing the 52nd floor of Apex Ventures headquarters in Manhattan. The polished marble floors reflected the ceiling lights like glass, and the tension in the air was thick enough to touch. At just 12 years old, Jamal Thompson stepped out, dressed in a navy blue tailored suit that fit him perfectly, a quiet symbol of dignity and defiance. Beside him walked his father, Darius, his protective gaze sweeping the hallway, followed closely by Alicia Ramirez, Innovate Ed's sharp attorney, and Malik Reeves, the company's loyal COO. Behind them trailed Victoria Langston, the former Megatech executive turned whistleblower, carrying a leather briefcase filled with recordings that could dismantle an empire. Today wasn't just about pitching Innovate Ed's global expansion to Apex Ventures. It was about survival. It was about proving that Jamal, a 12-year-old black CEO who had built a $1.5 billion company, belonged at the table where billion-dollar decisions were made, and everyone in that boardroom knew it. As the group entered the glass-walled conference room, 20 of Apex's most powerful investors were already seated around a gleaming oval table. At the head sat Robert Kim, Apex's board chairman, his calm presence masking a reputation for ruthless efficiency. He rose slightly as Jamal approached, extending his hand with quiet respect. "Mr. Thompson," Robert said warmly, "welcome to Apex Ventures. We've heard quite a lot about you." Jamal shook his hand firmly, forcing his nervousness deep beneath the surface. "Thank you for having me," he said softly, his voice steady despite the weight of dozens of eyes locked on him. But before the meeting could begin, Ethan Caldwell, Apex's senior strategy director and Megatech's quiet ally, leaned back in his chair, smirking faintly. "Before we get started," he drawled, his tone deliberately casual but cutting, "I have to ask the obvious question. Can a 12-year-old really handle a $250 million investment? Or is this just a feel-good PR stunt?" The words stung, sharp and calculated. A few board members shifted uncomfortably. Jamal felt his throat tighten, but before he could respond, Alicia leaned forward, her tone razor-sharp. "Mr. Caldwell," she said evenly, "perhaps your concerns would be better addressed after you've reviewed InnovateEd's numbers? Assuming, of course, that this board values facts over speculation." Robert Kim's gaze hardened, silencing any further interruptions. "We'll hear the presentation," he said firmly. Jamal nodded to Malik, who tapped his tablet. Projecting InnovateEd's pitch onto the massive glass display wall, the lights dimmed slightly as a vibrant, interactive dashboard lit up, showcasing the company's growth, real-time learning analytics, and global reach. Jamal took a deep breath and began speaking, his voice calm but commanding. 3 years ago, I was a struggling student, he said, meeting each board member's gaze with quiet confidence. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and traditional classrooms weren't designed for kids like me, so I built InnovateEd, an AI-driven platform that personalizes education based on how children learn, not how systems expect them to. Today, we serve 50 million students in 52 countries and have improved learning outcomes by 45% for children with special needs. But we're just getting started. He paused, letting the weight of the numbers settle. With Apex Ventures investment, we can expand InnovateEd into 60 countries within the next 18 months. We can bridge the educational gap for underserved communities and make learning accessible for every child, regardless of income, location, or diagnosis. Murmurs of approval rippled quietly around the table. But just as Jamal clicked to the next slide, Robert's assistant burst into the room, tablet in hand, whispering urgently into his ear. Robert frowned, then glanced toward Alicia. Megatech just filed an emergency press release, he said flatly. They're accusing InnovateEd of manipulating user data and inflating valuation numbers. Gasps broke out across the boardroom. Caldwell leaned back, smiling smugly, clearly anticipating the chaos. Jamal froze for half a second, the weight of the accusation crashing down like thunder. But Victoria Langston was already moving. She stepped forward, placing her briefcase on the table with deliberate force. "That's a lie," she said coldly, her voice slicing through the room. "And I have the proof." She opened the briefcase and removed a silver flash drive, sliding it across the table to Robert Kim. Inside this drive are 10 months of Megatech's internal recordings. You'll hear their executives planning this exact moment, discrediting Jamal, sabotaging this pitch, and forcing Apex Ventures to abandon InnovateEd so Megatech could buy it out for pennies. The room fell into stunned silence. Robert plugged in the drive, and within seconds, Megatech's own voices filled the boardroom speakers. A chilling snippet echoed, "We hit InnovateEd during the Apex meeting, plant rumors, push fake data leaks, make the kid look unstable." Board members exchanged shocked glances, murmurs rising. Caldwell's smirk faltered as Robert muted the audio, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Caldwell," Robert said slowly, his voice measured but sharp. "Were you aware of this?" Caldwell shifted uncomfortably, stammering, I have no knowledge of—" "Enough." Robert cut him off, his voice like steel. "From this moment forward, Apex Ventures will conduct an internal review of any conflicts of interest. For now, this board will evaluate InnovateEd based on facts, not manufactured scandals." Jamal exhaled quietly, his grip on the podium relaxing slightly. But before the tension could settle, the doors opened again, and standing there, uninvited. Was Edward Harrington? His face was pale, his expression strained, and for the first time since the flight, the arrogance was gone. "I need to speak," Harrington said, his voice rough, almost breaking. The boardroom went silent. "I was wrong," he admitted, his shoulders slumping as though carrying a weight too heavy to bear. "I filed the report against Jamal on Megatech's orders. They told me Innovate Ed was stealing proprietary tech. I believed them. I didn't know they were planning to destroy him." Jamal stared at him, wide-eyed, every muscle in his body coiled with conflicting emotions: anger, disbelief, and something else he couldn't name. Harrington's voice cracked as he continued. "My nephew has severe dyslexia," he said softly. "Innovate Ed is the only reason he's reading at grade level today. When I realized Megatech wanted to shut you down, I couldn't stay quiet anymore." He placed a small envelope on the table, sliding it toward Alicia. "This has copies of every email they sent me. Use them." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Robert Kim leaned back in his chair, folding his hands slowly. "Board members," he said evenly, "I believe we've heard enough." 10 minutes later, the vote was unanimous. Apex Ventures would approve Innovate Ed's $250 million investment, making it one of the largest education tech funding rounds in U.S. history. Jamal sat perfectly still, barely breathing as the reality sank in. Across the table, Alicia smiled softly, and Darius placed a proud hand on his son's shoulder. Malik clasped Jamal's small hand briefly, whispering, "We did it, boss." But Jamal shook his head gently. "No," he whispered back, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions. "This isn't the end. This is just the beginning." The morning sun spilled across the glass towers of New York City, but inside the FBI's Newark field office, the atmosphere was anything but calm. The air buzzed with tension as agents hurried through corridors carrying boxes of files, hard drives, and sealed warrants. Less than 24 hours after Apex Ventures approved Innovate Ed's historic $250 million investment, the federal investigation into Megatech investments was in full motion, in a quiet corner office. Special Agent Carla Mendoza stood before a wall covered in documents, photographs, and red strings connecting timelines of secret meetings and hidden accounts. Beside her, Agent Thomas Bennett tapped rapidly on his laptop, scanning internal Megatech records obtained from Victoria Langston's whistleblower files. "This goes deeper than we thought," Thomas muttered, scrolling past hundreds of flagged transactions. Shell companies in the Cayman Islands, fake consulting invoices, offshore accounts tied to Compete Learn. This isn't just corporate sabotage, this is a criminal enterprise. Carla nodded grimly. "And they've been doing it for years." She paused, glancing over her shoulder at the small conference room behind her, where Jamal Thompson sat with his father, Darius, Alicia Ramirez, and Malik Reeves, at just 12 years old. Jamal had unintentionally become the centerpiece of one of the largest tech fraud cases in U.S. history. Darius sat stiffly beside him, protective as ever, his hand resting lightly on Jamal's shoulder. Malik paced the room slowly, arms folded, while Alicia leaned over her laptop, preparing a statement for the press. In another corner, Victoria Langston quietly rehearsed for her upcoming testimony, her hands trembling slightly despite her composed expression. The knock on the door broke the silence. Carla entered, her dark blazer crisp, her expression serious but steady. "It's time," she said simply. Jamal looked up, his young face steady despite the storm around him. "What happens now?" he asked softly. Carla crouched slightly to meet his gaze. "We're moving on Megatech," she said firmly. "Search warrants, subpoenas, the whole thing. You've done your part. Now it's our turn." But things wouldn't be that simple. Just as Carla finished speaking, Alicia's phone buzzed violently on the table. She answered immediately, her sharp instincts bracing for the worst. On the other end, Robert Kim, Apex Ventures chairman, spoke urgently. Alicia, Megatech just went live on CNBC. He warned, they're accusing Innovate Ed of breaching student data privacy. They claim you've been selling learning analytics to third-party advertisers. Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief. That's a lie, he blurted, his small fists curling tightly. We would never do that. Alicia muted the call and looked at Carla, her jaw tightening. They're escalating, she said calmly but coldly. If they can't crush Innovate Ed in the boardroom, they'll try to destroy us in the court of public opinion. Carla exhaled sharply, already issuing orders into her radio. Get me the media team, she barked, and flag every Megatech statement from the past 24 hours. I want legal cross-checks before noon, across the city. Megatech's headquarters glimmered like a fortress of glass and steel. But inside, chaos erupted. In a top-floor executive suite, CEO Lawrence Pierce slammed his fist against the mahogany conference table, his face flushed with anger. How did this happen? He roared, his voice carrying across the room. A 12-year-old, a child, and now the FBI's breathing down my neck? Around the table, his board members shifted uneasily, but before anyone could respond, the door burst open. 2 FBI agents stepped inside, flanked by 3 federal marshals, Lawrence Pierce. Carla Mendoza's voice rang out as she entered behind them, her badge gleaming under the lights. You're under investigation for wire fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy to obstruct federal oversight. The room fell silent, one by one. Megatech executives were handed sealed subpoenas, their pale faces betraying panic as the reality sank in. Back at the FBI office, Jamal sat quietly, listening as Victoria Langston explained her upcoming testimony. They'll come after me hard, she said softly, adjusting the pearl studs in her ears. Megatech will drag my name through the mud, call me a traitor, ruin my career. She hesitated, her voice catching slightly. But I let them get away with too much for too long. No more. Jamal turned to her, his young voice quiet but powerful. You're doing the right thing, he said, his tone firm despite his age. Sometimes the truth costs everything, but it's still worth it. Victoria's lips curved into the faintest smile, her composure returning. You sound like someone twice your age, she whispered. Malik stepped forward, clapping a hand gently on Jamal's shoulder. That's because he is, he said proudly. Kid's been leading grown men since he was 9. Later that afternoon, Alicia gathered Jamal, Darius, Malik, and Victoria into the media room, preparing them for the coming storm. Once the FBI raids Megatech, the press will descend like sharks, she warned, her voice sharp and measured. Every network will want statements. Every investor will want answers. Jamal, the narrative has to be crystal clear. Innovate Ed was targeted, and you fought back with integrity. Jamal nodded, his expression calm but resolute. I'll tell the truth, he said simply. At precisely 4:30 p.m., news alerts exploded across every major network. FBI raids Megatech headquarters. Executives accused of targeting minority-led startups. Helicopters circled the Manhattan skyline as cameras swarmed the scene, capturing images of senior executives being escorted out in handcuffs. Clips from Megatech's internal recordings, provided by Victoria, began circulating online, exposing conversations where board members mocked the kid genius and vowed to make him disappear from the market. Public outrage ignited instantly. Hashtags like #StandWithJamal, #InnovateEdTruth, and #MegatechExposed trended across X, TikTok, and YouTube. Journalists flooded Innovate Ed's Chicago headquarters, demanding statements. Alicia stepped to the podium, cameras flashing wildly, and spoke with precision. Innovate Ed has always stood for equity, accessibility, and truth, she declared, her voice unwavering. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators, and let me be perfectly clear, this company, led by a remarkable 12-year-old CEO, has done nothing wrong. Jamal stood beside her, his small hands folded in front of him, looking directly into the cameras without flinching. Across social media, clips of his steady composure went viral instantly, gaining millions of views within hours. Meanwhile, inside Megatech's boardroom, chaos gave way to fear. More than a dozen executives resigned within 24 hours, and Lawrence Pierce himself was placed under house arrest pending a federal indictment in the midst of the media storm. Edward Harrington reached out to Innovate Ed privately. His recorded confession, combined with the emails he surrendered, became pivotal evidence, effectively dismantling Megatech's legal defenses. Still, the pressure on Jamal mounted. News crews followed him everywhere. Anonymous threats flooded Innovate Ed's inbox. The media painted him as both a genius and a lightning rod. And at just 12, the weight of it was overwhelming. One night, sitting in his bedroom surrounded by scattered robotics parts and comic books, Jamal whispered to Darius, "I didn't ask for any of this." "Dad." Darius knelt beside him, pulling him into a steady embrace. "I know, son," he said softly, his voice low and steady. "But maybe you were chosen for this. Sometimes the world doesn't wait for you to be ready. Sometimes it needs you now." Jamal wiped his eyes, nodding slowly, his small shoulders straightening again. "Then we finish what we started," he said quietly. Back at the FBI office, Carla Mendoza reviewed the final reports late into the night. Over $480 million in fraudulent transactions tied to Megatech had been uncovered. 5 executives faced federal charges, and thanks to Jamal's refusal to back down, the case was expanding to investigate similar tactics used against other minority-led startups across the country. The tide was turning, but as Carla glanced at Jamal's photo pinned to the investigation board, she knew this wasn't just a story about corruption or corporate power. It was about resilience, about a boy who refused to give up his seat, his company, or his voice, no matter how much the world tried to silence him. And the fight wasn't over yet. 6 months later. The crisp Chicago morning carried a quiet hum of anticipation as hundreds of people gathered outside the brand-new Community Innovation Center, its glass facade reflecting the rising sun. Cameras lined the streets, reporters murmured into microphones, and a banner above the entrance read, "Innovate Ed Global Summit, Building the Future of Learning." At the heart of it all stood Jamal Thompson, now 13, dressed in a fitted gray suit, his polished black shoes glinting under the lights. Despite the chaos surrounding him, he stood calm and poised, his small frame radiating a quiet strength earned through battles far greater than his age. Only half a year ago, Jamal had been humiliated on Flight 247, accused of fraud, and dragged into one of the largest federal investigations in tech history. Today, he was being celebrated as the visionary who changed the future of education. Behind him, his father Darius stood proudly, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder, while Alicia Ramirez, Innovate Ed's lawyer, coordinated the press, and Malik Reeves, the company's COO, reviewed last-minute presentation slides on his tablet. Victoria Langston lingered near the stage, the weight of her whistleblower testimony behind her but not forgotten, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd with quiet satisfaction. As Jamal stepped up to the podium, the crowd erupted into cheers. He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, teachers, students, investors, activists, and families from across the country. Taking a steady breath, he leaned toward the microphone, his young voice firm yet warm. "6 months ago," he began, his words carrying softly over the hushed audience. "I was just a kid on a plane, holding a boarding pass no one believed I deserved. That day changed everything for me. I learned how fast people can judge you based on your age, your background, or the color of your skin. But I also learned something bigger, that the truth is stronger than prejudice, and that perseverance is louder than hate. A ripple of applause spread through the audience, soft at first, then growing louder until it filled the plaza. Jamal smiled faintly, his confidence steady now, no longer the nervous boy gripping his seat in first class. Innovate Ed started as a tool I built for myself, he continued, glancing briefly at Darius in the front row. I was struggling with ADHD, falling behind in school, and I wanted a way to learn at my own pace. I didn't know it would grow into a platform serving 50 million students across 52 countries. And thanks to Apex Ventures' $250 million investment, we're now expanding into 60 countries, reaching communities where educational tools were once out of reach. He paused to let the numbers sink in, the pride in his voice tempered by humility. But this isn't about me, he said softly. This is about every kid who's ever been told they don't belong in a room, in a school, or in a future they dream of. Innovate Ed exists to make sure no child is left behind, no matter where they come from, what they look like, or how they learn. In the front row, a young boy no older than 9 wiped his glasses nervously, clutching a small Innovate Ed badge. Jamal noticed and smiled, locking eyes with him briefly before continuing. I want to share something I've learned, Jamal said, his tone deepening, his words deliberate. Age doesn't define your potential. Background doesn't limit your impact. And when the world underestimates you, sometimes the best response isn't anger, it's results. Applause thundered louder this time, rising like a wave, off to the side. Edward Harrington stood quietly among the guests, no longer a rival, but a collaborator. Since resigning from Compete Learn, he had started volunteering at Innovate Ed's community outreach programs, using his marketing skills to connect underserved schools with technology grants. He raised a hand in a quiet wave when Jamal's gaze landed on him, and Jamal offered a small nod in return. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement, as Jamal continued. He invited Victoria Langston onto the stage, introducing her to the audience. This is the woman who helped expose Megatech's corruption, he said proudly, because of her courage. We weren't just able to defend Innovate Ed. We helped protect other minority-founded startups targeted by the same system. Victoria's choice changed lives. The audience erupted into applause as Victoria stepped forward, her expression composed but emotional. In the 6 months since her testimony, Megatech had collapsed under the weight of federal charges. Over a dozen executives faced prison sentences, and CEO Lawrence Pierce awaited trial on counts of fraud, racketeering, and obstruction. The case, now dubbed the Eclipse Scandal by the media, had rewritten federal oversight policies for venture-backed startups, ensuring greater protection against predatory corporate sabotage. Jamal's voice softened as he reached his final words. We faced powerful people who tried to silence us. They tried to take my seat, my company, and my voice, but we're still here. Innovate Ed is still here. And today isn't just a celebration of what we built. It's a promise of what comes next. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd one last time, his tone resolute. To every young person listening, your ideas matter, your voice matters, and no one, no matter how powerful, gets to decide your worth but you. The crowd surged to its feet, the applause rolling like thunder through the plaza. Darius wiped the corner of his eye discreetly, pride written across every line of his face. Alicia squeezed Malik's arm, smiling broadly, while Victoria folded her hands, her shoulders finally unburdened. Cameras flashed, capturing the image of Jamal standing tall at the podium, a boy who had faced prejudice, conspiracy, and betrayal, and emerged stronger than ever, across social media. The moment went viral instantly. Clips tagged with hashtag InnovateEdSummit and hashtag StandWithJamal spreading worldwide within minutes. News anchors called him the face of a new generation of innovators, while education leaders praised InnovateEd's mission as a model for global reform. Later that evening, as the summit wound down, Jamal wandered quietly through the Innovation Center's halls, his fingertips grazing the glass walls where new AI-powered learning labs were being set up. Darius joined him, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "You did good today," he said softly. Jamal looked up at him, his expression calm but reflective. "We did good," he corrected gently. Outside, Chicago's skyline glittered under the setting sun, and for the first time in months, Jamal allowed himself to breathe deeply, to stand still, and to feel the weight of everything he had endured, and everything still ahead. This wasn't just the end of one story, it was the beginning of a legacy. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more powerful stories.